Welcome to the Computational Antitrust podcast. My name is Schrepel. I am a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center, an associate professor of law at the VU Amsterdam, and the creator of the Computational Antitrust project, which explores how legal informatics can benefit antitrust law. The project brings together over 65 competition agencies and 35 academics on the advisory board. Each month or so, we publish an academic article on the subject of computational antitrust. You may find all of these publications in open access at computationalantitrust.com. Today, I am delighted to receive our editor-in-chief, Teodora Groza, to talk about the annual report I had the pleasure to co-edit with her. So here's what we're going to do. First, I will give a very brief overview of our annual report on computational antitrust. Then Teodora will give some more detail about the report, and we will play tennis table. But that's a surprise for later today. So to give a sense of the report, so what we did as last year, we asked all of the antitrust agencies that are part of the Computational Antitrust project to send a 2 to 5 pages contribution explaining where and how they deploy computational tools in their day-to-day practice. We received this year 26 contributions for a total of 103 pages, coming from pretty much the entire globe. So we believe it's representative of what agencies are doing in not only Latin America, but Asia, Europe, and some other part of the world, but also coming from big agencies and much smaller agencies with just a handful of employees. We asked this year that they insist on the institutional challenges that come with the implementation of computational tools. So we are very pleased, obviously, to publish the reports. It's open access. I will put the link in the notes to this episode. Once again, a big thank you to all of the agencies. We already launched the report officially in June of this year at the OECD, in the presence of most of the competition agencies. It was a lot of fun, maybe especially the cocktails after the lunch. But back to the report, I will now give the floor to Teodora so that you can give us a first sense of what's in the report and why everyone, of course, should read the report very carefully.
Thank you very much, Thibaut, for this introduction. I'll just give a brief overview of what's inside, maybe to convince listeners who have not already read it to give it a try. So if I were to summarize the report in 2 or maybe 3 words, I would say that what shows up the most is that agencies talk about proactive enforcement and real-time antitrust. So we see a lot of computational tools which enable agencies to sort of synchronize their work with what happens on the market, and this is, of course, great news. Now, if we look a bit at the general tools which are being used, we see a lot of switch to electronic records. We see that agencies have sort of integrated their databases with those of other government agencies. And also we see a lot of new developments in terms of the fact that computational tools have become generalized, as in they are not used here and there, but they have become sort of commonplace throughout antitrust investigations overall, from market definition tools to bid rigging to merger control and so on. And also, we are really happy to see that digitization has become a priority as we see more and more units dedicated to data analysis and computational tools popping up in competition agencies from Australia to Luxembourg. And now, just to give you a bit of a sense of how computational tools are used to detect specific practices, we have lots of activity going on in public procurement, lots of bid rigging detection tools from Australia to Bulgaria, Poland, Romania, and so on. And we also see agencies using data screening tools which enable them to analyze data from public procurement agencies. And this happens in places like Czechia or Catalonia. If we move on to abuse of dominance, we see lots happening in terms of digital platforms conduct. There are tools being used which enable agencies to detect abusive contract clauses, to monitor terms and conditions of platforms, but also to identify potential harms through analyzing online choice architectures. And this happens in places like Luxembourg, Poland, UK, and so on. And then when it comes to cartels, we see some agencies using real-time price monitoring tools. For instance, in Armenia and Greece, this is happening a lot. And then something very interesting, we see that when it comes to down rates, agencies now are using also data from instant messaging platforms, which of course broadens a lot their toolkit and their capabilities to analyze potential collusive conduct. And then to move on to what companies care about the most, if we look at merger controls, it's fantastic to see that merger notifications have been fully digitized in many places around the world. Something which helps agencies themselves a lot is that they have developed document generation tools which enable them to redact merger documents. And this is fantastic news precisely because I think junior staff will spend much less time on this very formulaic and boring task. And then something very interesting, when it comes to merger control, we see also activity in analyzing the effects of practices and not just their detection. And we see that in Taiwan, for instance, the competition agency is deploying regression analysis to identify the potential effect of mergers. And then lastly, there are some jurisdictions where mergers don't have to be notified, like the UK. And there, the competition authority has developed a tool to track mergers by screening news articles. So this is a bit about what's in the report. And on that note, I think we can move on to our little tennis game. So Thibaut, this is for you now.
Yeah, sure. So thanks a lot. And indeed, we thought we would be playing tennis table in this episode of the podcast to make it very interactive and hopefully fun to listen to. So what we have prepared on a non-coordinated basis is a list of some of the ideas that we think are the most surprising, the most helpful to companies, to consumers. And I will, at the very same time, discover what Theodora has prepared, and then I will give my take on those different items. So we'll start with the first. The first we wanted to discuss is the idea throughout the report that populates the most. So Theodora, I'm curious to hear what you found to be the most pressing issue being addressed by competition agencies.
It would be quite funny if we had different answers for this question, but let's see. So what I found to be the dominant trend is the use of cartel screening and bid rigging tools. And I see this happening everywhere from Australia to Poland. I'm really curious whether you agree with this.
Yeah, so I cheated a bit because I've listed 3. I think last year, what we see is that there is a lot being deployed for internal processes. But we mentioned that last year already, so I thought, okay, let me put that on the side. Then a big difference from last year is the use of machine learning. We see that it is developing in Australia, Bulgaria, Chile, Colombia, Czechia, Finland, France, Greece, Poland, Spain, Taiwan, Turkey, and the UK. And indeed, it is most of the time to detect collusion. So we are on the same page. But what I think I will actually answer is, and this is a big change compared from last year, is the work agencies are doing when it comes to merger control, something you already presented in your introduction to the report. But it's quite striking that the entire range of what is merger control is being covered by those computational tools. It is used to tackle the issues related to common ownership. That's the case in Chile, Czechia, France, and Romania. You see that some agencies are using computational tools for the hosting of documents to also process the documentation they receive and analyze automatically those documents, for instance, to extract information and put it in the hand of the case handlers. That is being used in Kenya, Mexico, and Singapore. And as you mentioned, something that I'm sure we'll come back to is the idea of using those tools to analyze the actual mergers and simulate the effect of those concentrations. And that is the case in Czechia and Taiwan. So that will be my answer to the question, but indeed, we are pretty much on the same page, I suppose. Let me now move on to item number 2. And that will be also very surprising if we had the same answer to this one. What is the idea that you like the most amongst all of the implementations that we see in the report?
So I love this question because it allows us to talk about our own research, because I think that our preferences are very much shaped by what we look at in our work. And as you know, I do research into firms and legal entities. So what I like the most are naturally tools that identify links between economic agents based on ownership relations. And as you said, this happens, for instance, in Chile. And we see that there they even started 2 lawsuits based entirely on information gathered through tools enabling them to spot hidden links between economic agents, which are seemingly independent, but actually, when you zoom in, not at all. And we see similar tools being used in France and Czechia, which are part of a broader European project called Datacross, I think, and also in Spain, based on ownership structures. So it's actually very interesting for me to see how the focus on legal entities and firm structures is actually permeating the work of competition agencies throughout the globe. This is great news for my PhD, for sure. And now back to you. What's the idea you like the most?
Of course. So first, let me say that indeed, when we talk about common ownership, as I'm sure every listeners will know, you are here on the edge of merger control and cartel on the other end, right? And having practiced for quite some years, it may be that some operations are so hard to analyze or so on the edge that it may be that you would need to notify, but if not, then you may be into the category of a cartel. So quite interesting as a practitioner, and indeed something that researchers may enjoy researching. Again, I cheated. I had 2 ideas. One is very micro, and another one is more macro, and give a broader picture of what's happening in the field. The one that I like a lot, and I've mentioned this already at the OECD during our launch event, is what the ACCC is doing in Australia, where they use topic modeling on all the documents and the consumer complaints to analyze the common themes in these complaints and therefore start investigation on that basis. I think it's feasible, it's important, and it's non-confrontational, right? This is something that benefits directly the consumers. So I like that very much. Now, taking a step back, something that I like a lot, which we see in the report, is the use of open source, and agencies are doing it both ways, actually. First, they use data coming from other agencies or maybe sometimes open databases to better understand the markets and detect practices. This is what Bulgaria, Catalonia, Chile, Mexico, and Greece are doing. You see that they also use open access tools to actually do better screening and better understanding of practices. Kenya, for instance, is using open source data analysis tool, one called R Analytics. Spain is using open source intelligence and human intelligence tools that is freely accessible. And the UK is creating an open source solution to translate some of the documentation they receive when it's not in English, right? Now, what I think is also interesting is that some other agencies are actually making their solution open source. And here I have in mind the UK that is putting the code of its web scraping tool out there for other agencies to use, but also maybe for companies, right, if they want to avoid infringing antitrust. So that open source sentiment that I see when I read the reports echoes what we see with generative AI, and I think that's a trend to be encouraged. So something that I like a lot, and again, totally biased related to my research. Item number 3. What is the idea that you did not think about before reading the report, but you actually think is a good idea and a good use of computational tools?
So before jumping in and answering this question, I just want to comment a second on your previous answer. I'm very happy to hear that what you said is so different from what I said, because it shows that there was no collusion happening between us before we decided on what to say. And also, I'm very happy to see that you also leveraged your own research interest in your answer. So it wasn't just me being very self-oriented and self-focused.
Of course not.
And now back to your question. This one is also super interesting. And what I liked the most was actually the fact that Colombia is using a tool to screen new regulatory instruments which might impact competition and to detect how new regulations can actually have an impact on market structures. And I think this is fascinating, mainly because when we think about the government and its intervention in structuring markets, we tend to think that whatever is happening on that note will be pro-competitive and helpful for competition. But the fact that Colombia is actually spending time and resources in analyzing these tools shows that sometimes regulation might not be the best intervention in market structures. And also we see a lot happening in the European Union where we have new instruments which are not per se targeted towards enhancing competition, but which might have an impact on how competition works. And it's very important to pay attention at this interplay as competition scholars, because sometimes we are very narrow focused and we look only at what happens within our little pigeonhole, when in fact competitive dynamics are actually involved by a much broader set of actors, regulations, instruments, and so on. I'm curious whether you agree with this.
Yeah, I like that you called us pigeons. So I feel guilty here for two reasons. Reason number one, it's the third item, and for the third time I cheated, not answering the question. And also I feel guilty, reason number two, because we kind of have the same answer, although not exactly the same. So the reason why I cheated is because I will take an idea that is not actually in the report, but that I got whilst reading the report, and that's when I read the contribution coming out of Turkey. What the agency is saying is that they want to promote, I quote, competition culture. And what they mentioned, and this is where we are on the same page, is that they are aware and mindful of the fact that when they intervene on the market, they want the effect to be positive. And this is something that they try to document, to track, doing retrospective studies. What the idea I had when reading that is that it may be a good use of generative AI to try to promote competition law by making effective campaigns, maybe on social media, maybe on other outlets. So I would love to see AI being used to promote more of competition culture. I know that some agencies are very creative. Japan is one of them. I remember the Bundeskartellamt also in Germany had some good use of compliance tools here to foster the understanding of the field. And I think that Turkey, with this idea of promoting competition culture, could actually lead the way here using generative AI. So this is the answer to item number 3. Now, item number 4. And here we may be more serious for a second. I'm curious what you think is the tool that is helping consumers the most amongst all of the ones, again, disclosed in the report.
So I think that this is my second most favorite question, because it brings us back to what competition law is supposed to do, as in help consumers. And it's great to see that computational tools are also leveraged in this direction. I actually have 2 items here, so I'm doing a bit of a Thibaut style answer and cheating. My most favorite is the fact that there are price monitoring tools which are also accessible for consumers. I talked a bit in my introduction about how agencies monitor prices real time to make sure that there's no cartelization happening. Some agencies like Armenia and Greece make this price monitoring databases available for consumers as well, and this helps them make more informed decisions on the market, and I think that's fantastic. But I also have a second answer, and this is different, but I think also very important for consumers. We see that the competition agency of Greece actually monitors social media activities to understand consumer preferences. And even if this helps consumers indirectly, it's fantastic to see that the agency actually spends time in trying to understand what consumers care about and tries to tailor its enforcement activities based on this data. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. I'm really curious whether you agree with this and what's your answer for this one.
Yeah, so I thought the last item that you mentioned was indeed very good. The one I had is the one I mentioned already, that is the ACCC, the use of topic modeling based on the consumer complaints. And I guess I'm also here biased, but doing research in the blockchain ecosystem, I can see that there is a fear of government, in and of itself. And what I've been arguing to the people in the ecosystem is that if they suffer from practices that they think maybe, an abuse of power, they don't have computational expertise, but, they may get a sense that a practice imposed by another company against them is not normal. What I've been arguing is that they could go on the website of their national competition agency and just fill a complaint, send an email, and the agency won't go after, that very company, because, this will be such a bad policy, but the agency, of course, may investigate the practice implemented by the other company that may be guilty of infringing competition law. So if indeed companies are to use those forms and complaints and send emails to the agencies, maybe just to ask questions, I think it's good that agencies are also well equipped to deal with the amounts of complaints they may receive. So something that I applaud. Item number 5. So almost the last one I want to discuss today with you. Now we move on to what helps consumers to what helps companies. So here again, the floor is yours.
So for me, this was very self-evident, and I would be actually very surprised if you had a different answer. So based on the fact that the bulk of the work of companies when it comes to antitrust enforcement is merger notifications, I think that what helps them the most is the fact that many jurisdictions have actually fully automatized merger notifications. I'm curious whether you have a different answer for this one.
I do, yes. It's also biased. The one I had is, and you will soon understand why it is biased, what the French competition agency is doing with a network analysis. The reason why it's biased is because, of course, we published their paper on the subject and helped them with the project. So if you haven't listened to it or read the paper, just go back to a few episodes back. But basically, what the agency did is that they analyzed 650 something decisions, put them all in a graph, and allow everyone to visualize which decision is quoting which other decisions. And to the surprise of the agency, as you will listen to in the podcasts and some practitioners, there were some decisions that, of course, they knew would be cited a lot, being very important, but some other decisions were not so evident for practitioners to take into consideration. And what I like especially is that you may want to, for instance, care about the tuna market, although you are dealing with a client in the digital sector. Why? Because the practice punished by the agency in that decision may be very much relevant. So this is the answer to my question. And of course, where it's also even more than biased is because I would love agencies to create similar tools. Now, in the report, and other agencies mentioning that they tried and failed, which I think was very brave and very helpful for other agencies to understand the reason why they could not make up such a graph. But this is something that I think is very important, not only to companies, but also maybe to the agencies themselves and the practitioners. All right, let's move on to the very last item I want to address here today with you is the one of where you think researchers, such as you and I, can help agencies the most. So again, when reading the report, we see that agencies are making a very steep, and important progress in the last couple of weeks and months, and it's very impressive. Now, of course, we still have a role to play, and I'm curious where you think you could be the most helpful to those agencies.
Yeah, so thank God there's still work for scholars like us, right? Actually, my answer brings me and actually both of us back to our first discussion after we gathered the contributions to the report, and also back to our OECD event. What we talked about a lot was how there's lots of work being done on detecting practices, but there's very little work being done on analyzing their effects. And I think that this is where scholars can play a role. And we see piecemeal interventions being done here and there. I think the most notable one is Taiwan, where, as I said before, they do regression analysis to identify the potential effects of mergers. I would be very happy to see a bit of collusion, perhaps, between academics and the agencies on how they could design tools which could enable us to foresee what are the effects of different practices. Because I think that one of the issues of antitrust is that it's very formalistic, as in we tend to box different types of market conduct into very narrow labels. And then as soon as a type of conduct is labeled as being anti-competitive, we don't really analyze as much as we should its effects to see if it's actually as harmful as we assume it to be. I'm really curious whether we will see developments in the future on this front, and I would be very happy to actually contribute to this development. Now back to you.
Yeah. So
what do you think?
We finally have the very same answer. And I think this is an obvious one. What we could do as academics is to come up with the first draft of guidelines for agencies to ease the use of computational tools, not only to detect practices, but also to come up with decisions, right? And I see that there is at least two challenges. One is for the agencies to balance quantity, something that computational tools can actually provide them with the quality of information, right? So what do you do in case of a price increase versus a better product? And to be even more specific, there are trade-offs, especially when it comes to the use of AI, regarding explainability, privacy, accuracy, and the right to be forgotten. Let me be more specific, and here I'm quoting the work of one of our advisory board member, Ima Lakaraju, from Harvard University. She recently published a paper in which she explains that there are at least two trade-offs we may want to consider. Number one, on the one hand, there is a right to privacy to protect the individuals, right? On the other hand, we want AI to be explainable. Now, the problem is that if you actually provide explanations, you may or will infer with the individual's rights for privacy, right? So you're going to have at some point to say, well, this is the reason why the AI system came up or reached that conclusion. And why is that? Because in the training data, we had this personal data regarding some individuals. So you have a trade-off here for agencies to address. Trade-off number two, you have on the one hand the right to an explanation as to why a decision was taken against you. This is addressed in one of our last publications. And on the other end, you have the right to be forgotten. Now, here again, you have a trade-off. On the one hand, the right to be forgotten allows individuals such as you and me to request that the data is being removed from databases. On the other end, if you want to understand why a decision was taken against you, you may want to be able to check the training data for the AI system to function. But if an individual asks for the data to be removed, then this may be that the reason why the AI system reacted in a certain way is actually out of the system now, by the time you actually try to explore and understand the functioning of it. So those trade-offs are not easy. We're going to have at some point to make a choice, or agencies will have to make a choice. And I think the role of academics is to put them on the front and explain to agency, there is no right and wrong. It's a maybe a political question here, but here's at least the trade-off and how you should design the system if you favor, let's say, the right to an explanation over the right to be forgotten, or vice versa. So that eventually we can indeed use more of those tools to reach very specific decisions.
I have two items, actually. The first one is a comment on your answer. I think it was perfectly on brand for you to speak about trade-offs, because as our listeners who know you probably know already, trade-offs is your favorite word when it comes to the computational system. And now moving on to my last point, I'm wondering whether you want to share with our listeners a bit about what we've been doing in the past months, in case they have sort of lost track of our many activities, and what they should pay attention to in the future months.
Yeah, of course. So we started the project now 2.5 years ago. We've been publishing, I don't know, I lost count, but pretty much one article every month, every 2 months. So we kept on doing that. We organized that OECD conference in June of 2023. We hope to organize the very same event, of course, better and improved next year when we have report number 3. We will organize our annual conference in December of this year, once again, inviting all of our academics, the advisory boards, the competition agencies to have a big discussion. Now, on the side, and this is something that I believe we already mentioned on the podcast, we've been trying to develop some sub-projects. One that will be put online very soon is an index of computational tools used in the field of antitrust, whether by agencies or companies. Something we discussed, if I remember well, during our very first annual conference, is that some agencies are very comfortable using tools coming from the privates, and some other agencies do not want to do that. They want to develop all of the tools themselves and or use the tools developed by other agencies. In any case, we thought it may be helpful to create a first map of what is being deployed as we speak. Last week, a big merger was announced in the space of computational law So we see that the space is gaining traction. And of course, we focus a lot on the agencies, but we see that law firms and companies are also deploying those tools. And I bet you money that in 10 years from now, the big law firms will all work with computer and data scientists, right? So this is not something just for the agencies. And so, of course, they will use tools, develop new tools, new solutions. So that will be made open access in the coming weeks. We are also working toward the creation of a hackathon, something that was mentioned by some of the members of our advisory boards during our second annual conference. And I'm probably forgetting a few items, so if you want to complete my answer, please go ahead.
Now you've been as exhaustive as you usually are. This was a great summary of what we've been doing. We also have been publishing amazing papers, which I hope all of our listeners have read or will read at least after listening to this discussion. And on that note, I think it's time to wish everyone a great summer and lots of interesting competition law readings.
Indeed, yes. Thank you so much, Theodora, once again. And to everyone out there, take care of yourself. And if you can, someone else too. Bye-bye.
Bye.